Hi, I'm Tony, and today we're going to add binding to a quilt using the tuck method for binding in 3 simple steps. Step 1 of adding your binding to your quilt is to actually sew the binding on. Now, we're going to do this a simple way. First thing we want to do, you notice I still have my salvage on the end. I just want to trim that salvage right off, so I don't have that. Then I want to take my binding, I'm going to open it up, I'm going to hold one side, and I'm going to fold down the top of the binding towards the bottom of the binding. So I have a 45-degree angle. Now, whenever we're adding binding onto our quilt, we want to add the raw edge to the raw edge. So with our 45-degree angle, I'm going to place it exactly where I want to start and finish my binding. And then I'm going to start sewing. So I'm going to sew it at the very end. Let's put our presser foot down. And we're going to sew that. Now I'm going to continue sewing about an inch and a half past where this is. You can even go a little farther if you like. And then we're going to trim our thread. Now you notice I forgot to mention that the purple matches my binding. You always want to try to match your thread to your binding, and we'll get into the reasons why in step number 3. So now we're going to close the binding, and I'm going to start sewing where I just left off. And I'm going now, again, raw edge to raw edge. The very first time that I bound something, I didn't pay attention to that part of it. I kind of lined up the right edge to the I actually flipped my binding over, so I had the raw edges hanging out. I still have that placemat. All right, we're going to go to the very end. Now, as we reach a corner, we're going to slow down, and I'm going to stop about a half of an inch from the edge. And then I'm going to back it up, and we're going to really kind of put that thread in there. So I'm securing that thread, and then we're going to trim it. Now, this is the part of adding the binding that a lot of people seem to have problems with. And this, the easiest way that I remember how to do the corners is we want to take a look at where we want to go. So this is where we are right now, and this is where we want to go here. So we want to get this binding over here. So we're going to take our binding, we're going to fold it away from where we want to go, and again, 45-degree angles. We have another 45-degree angle right here, and I'm going to hold this with my finger. So I'm lining up the edge of the binding with the edge of the raw edge, so raw edge to raw edge, holding this, and then we're folding it back where we want to go. So away where you want to go, and then towards where you want to go. Now, this is how you can tell if you've done it right. If you have a flippy flappy, we have a flippy flappy right here. And yes, that's a technical term in the Tony world, it's a flippy flappy. So we're going to lay this back down. So this is a perfect line of where we want to go. And we're going to turn our quilt. And we're going to start sewing about a 1/4 inch from the end. Now I'm going to go forward a couple and then back a couple just to really kind of secure that thread in there, and then start sewing down the line. And that's how you sew the binding on. So I'm going to go through and continue to sew around and do those corners just like I showed you, and I will come back when we've reached the end of the quilt, the end of the binding, adding it on, and I'll show you what to do at the end. Now let's finish off sewing this on the last row. So here's my last flippy flappy that I have. So I'm going to start sewing about a 1/4 inch from the end. So sewing forward and going back to lock that thread in. So let's sew towards where we started, making sure that we're lining up raw edge to raw edge. Now, as I'm getting close, I'm keeping an eye on where down here my pouch is, because that's exactly what we did at the beginning, was we created a pouch. Because remember, this is the tuck method of binding. So I'm going to take my binding and I'm going to fix my tuck. So now I'm going to push this up in here so I have a true pouch. And it's now laid out nicely, as you can see. And I have a little bit of extra pouch right here. That's where this is going to go. So I'm going to lay this on top, line up where it ends. So right here is where my sewing starts. So I'm going to trim this just before that point. All right. And of course, this is all scrap that can throw into my scrap bin. Now we're going to take this here, or I'm going to take this little end right here, and we're going to tuck it in. Just like that. We're lining up the bottom to the bottom, and then I'm taking my fingers and then tucking it in and holding this. Now, as we get close, as we're sewing and getting close to that tuck there, I'm going to lift up my presser foot because we want to make sure, see how it's trying to get caught right here on my presser foot? Let's lift that up so that doesn't happen. And now I'm going to continue sewing past where I started sewing. And let's back this up to lock it in. And that's it. Our binding is sewn on, and step 1 is finished. Step 2 is taking this binding right here and flipping it around and then holding it into place for sewing. It's a pretty simple thing, but it does take a lot of practice. The first thing that you want to do is take a roller and roll it along the entire end of where you're going to flip. I always just do one end at a time. So we want to do it on that side, and then we want to roll on the back side. Now the reason for this is you want to remove all hair, dust, and dirt from where you're where you're flipping the binding. So this area right here is going to be inside your binding, and it's going to be sewn, meaning it may be trapped forever. So if there's any hair, dust, or dirt there, you want to get rid of it first. So, and then the next step is you want to trim all of the threads from your corners. And then we're going to flip this corner. So we're actually going to take our thumb and put it in here and pull this corner up as much as we can. We're not going to secure this corner yet. I'm actually just going to continue on with this. Now, when you're pulling this, when you're pulling the binding, you actually want to give it a good tug and flip. So in this case, you see how much binding is showing on this side. If you pull it too tightly, you see there's very little binding. So don't pull too tightly, just pull it out all the way and then rest it. The object is to have a decent amount showing on this side, and we want to cover our sewn area here because this line is exactly where we're going to start sewing on the other side. So let's go ahead and push that down. Now I am using Wonder clips in order to hold it in place. So I'm just putting a clip right there. So we're going to do this the entire way down, where I'm just giving it a light, gentle tug and fold. Every now and then I also like to flip it to the other side just to make sure that my binding looks good on the right side. And of course, whenever we talk about right sides and wrong sides, right sides are the side with the design, or maybe the side with the color. It's the side that you're going to see. The wrong side is the opposite of that. Now, you're going to see this, but my back is the opposite of my front, which is why I call this the wrong side in this case. All right, so let's go ahead. When we get to the end right here, we're going to wait to flip this. So let's keep adding our clips all the way down. There we are. And I did use the same backing as I did for this binding. Now, we're almost finished here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this. And I'm going to, before I flip this corner, I want to make sure I remove this hair, dust, and dirt. So I'm using my roller. I'm going to go all the way down, and then this side. And then, just like we did with the first side, I'm going to trim all of the extra little threads from that corner. Now I'm going to flip this corner. It would help if you could see what I was doing. So now I'm going to flip this corner, and then I'm going to go ahead and clip the rest of this side here. And then I'm going to turn and clip this side first. Before I actually do this corner, let's flip that right there. Now for the corner, this is the second biggest thing that people have an issue with. We're going to pull this corner out all the way, and then I'm going to make another 45-degree angle. So I'm going to lay it down. I like to lay the bottom side first of where I'm going, and then we're going to fold this over right here and put a pin in that right there so we can see that's going to hold right there. Now I'm going to just go down and keep on pinning and keep on clipping. So we've got this and here, and that is step number 2. So we're just going to keep on clipping. We're going to do all 4 of our corners with those pins to hold that in place. And if you do it correctly, you can see you have a nice mitered corner where it's a beautiful holding it together. All right, ready for step 3? The first thing we want to do for step 3 is change our presser foot. So this is my 1/4 inch foot with guide so that I sew a perfect 1/4 inch every single time. I use that for step 1. We're going to switch that out for another foot. I personally like the J foot for step number 3 because it is a open area right here. It's perfectly clear so I can see exactly what I'm doing because we're stitching in the ditch. So I want to make sure that I see everything. So the nice thing about the J foot is you have a line right here that where your needle is going to go, and I can see exactly what's leading up to this line. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're sewing in the ditch. So I'm following along right here, this ditch here, that actually sews it in place. All the way down. Now, this is the reason why we want to match our thread to our binding, is we want to try to, as much as we can, to get in that ditch, but let's be honest, you're not going to be able to stay within that ditch the entire time. So I try, when this happens, to lean towards the binding instead of towards the quilt. Because when I lean towards the binding, I know that it's still going to catch the back. It's not going to have any issues. And by matching the thread to the binding, by going towards the binding, you still won't be able to see it. All right, let's take a look at what we just sewed. So it looks like, nope, that looks good. That's nice in the binding. And let's take a look at the back. And also, because we matched our thread to our binding, you can't see the thread on the back. So you can see that nicely. You can see the indentation of the thread, but it blends right in there, and it has a nice blended feel. All right, so let's sew all the way down, and I will show you my trick with corners. Now, make sure you take out the clips as you go. Do not sew over your clips. Now, you're not going to go this fast. I'm only going this fast right now so that we can reach that corner in time. In fact, when I do binding on my Twitch stream, we have games of how fast I can do this. And everyone puts guesses of times, and this is for both my free motion quilting and my binding, for all the steps of the binding. Because I've been doing this a long time, I can go pretty fast. All right, so now we're reaching our corner. So let's get in the corner. Now I'm going to lift up my presser foot. I'm going to reach in there with my nail. If you don't have a nail, some tweezers are always good. These are my favorite tweezers in order to get in and get that pin out if my nails don't do the job. And then I'm going to take one of my quilting pins, or my quilting safety pins, and I'm going to hook it right here and turn it. So now we're going to keeping the needle in a down position so it's not moving. We're turning the quilt, putting my presser foot down. Now, why am I doing this? You see our feed dogs right here? It's not touching a lot of fabric. Chances are, whenever I start sewing, those feed dogs won't be able to really grasp that fabric there. So I'm going to use this as a helper. So I'm not going to pull it unless I need to. In fact, I didn't need to pull it that time. The feed dogs did their job. And that's it. And we're going to go down and sew all the way down and do the same thing on each corner. And I will come back when I reach the end of the quilt to show you what to do at the very end. This is my last corner on the way to finishing off the binding. First thing I'm going to do is let's take this pin out. Oops, wait. Nope, too early. Let's get to that corner first. There we go. Now we want to take this pin out. Lift up the presser foot. Take the pin out. And then add in my safety pin. Let's turn this. Again, needle down. And we're going to use my safety pin. Nope, I didn't need it that time either. Fantastic. Now when we reach the end, we do have our little threads from the very beginning. So we want to make sure we trim those. Let's trim the thread at the beginning, on the top and at the bottom. And as we get close, let's take that clip out. Now I'm going to sew all the way down until where I started sewing, and then I'm going to lock this in. So let's back this up a few times and go forward a few times again. I'm going to back it up twice just to make sure. And that's it. Our step 3 of the entire sewing the binding on is finished. And now we have a beautiful binding that is on our special quilt. Hopefully you learned something today, and now you know how to sew binding onto a quilt. Please like this video, follow my YouTube, as well as my Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and don't forget about Twitch, where you can interact with me as I sew live.